Folk Tales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson, and this week we round out the year with our final episode from the life of Benvenuto Cellini. This one is terribly cut about from his entire biography, so I can't thank individual readers. Thank you to everyone who read anything in either of the two volumes and their production teams. It contains each time that alchemy is used to save Cellini's life, with a couple of exceptions. I haven't included the poisoning he suffered in prison from being given what he thought was a ground diamond, which turned out to be a sapphire or something like that. That's a separate episode called Cellini Was Poisoned Like a Prince. Similarly, I haven't gone through his entire treatment for one of the fevers he had, although this does contain the bit at the end where he throws up a venomous caterpillar. Goodbye, Cellini, and I hope everyone else enjoyed this voyage through the life of what was almost certainly a Viriditas Magus as much as I did.
During the course of my artillery practice, which I never intermitted through the whole month passed by us beleaguered in the castle, I met with a great many very striking accidents, all of them worthy to be related. But since I do not care to be too prolix, or to exhibit myself outside the sphere of my profession, I will omit the larger part of them, only touching upon those I cannot well neglect, which shall be the fewest in number and the most remarkable. The first which comes to hand is this. Messer Antonio Santacroce had made me come down from the Angel, in order to fire on some houses in the neighbourhood, where certain of our besiegers had been seen to enter. While I was firing, a cannon shot reached me, which hit the angle of a battlement, and carried off enough of it to be the cause why I sustained no injury. The whole mass struck me in the chest and took my breath away. I lay stretched upon the ground like a dead man, and could hear what the bystanders were saying. Among them all, Messer Antonio Santacroce lamented greatly, exclaiming, "Alas, alas, we have lost the best defender that we had." Attracted by the uproar, one of my comrades ran up. He was called Gianfrancesco, and was a bandsman, but was far more naturally given to medicine than to music. On the spot he flew off, crying for a stoup of the very best Greek wine. Then he made a tile red hot, and cast upon it a good handful of wormwood; after which he sprinkled the Greek wine, and when the wormwood was well soaked, he laid it on my breast, just where the bruise was visible to all. Such was the virtue of the wormwood that I immediately regained my scattered faculties. I wanted to begin to speak, but could not, for some stupid soldiers had filled my mouth with earth, imagining that by doing so they were giving me the sacrament; and indeed they were more like to have excommunicated me, since I could with difficulty come to myself again; the earth was doing me more mischief than the blow. However, I escaped that danger, and returned to the rage and fury of the guns, pursuing my work there with all the ability and eagerness that I could summon.
Maestro Francesco then gave orders that I should be removed from my room, and carried to one of the hills there are in Rome. Cardinal Cornaro, when he heard of my improvement, had me transported to a place of his on Monte Cavallo. The very evening I was taken with great precautions in a chair, well wrapped up and protected from the cold. No sooner had I reached the place than I began to vomit, during which there came from my stomach a hairy worm, about a quarter of a cubit in length. The hairs were long, and the worm was very ugly, speckled of divers colours, green, black, and red. They kept and showed it to the doctor, who said he had never seen anything of the sort before, and afterwards remarked to Felice, "Now take care of your Benvenuto, for he is cured. Do not permit him any irregularities, for though he has escaped this time, another disorder now would be the death of him. You see his malady has been so grave, that if we had brought him the extreme unction, we might not have been in time. Now I know that with a little patience and time he will live to execute more of his fine works." Then he turned to me and said, "My Benvenuto, be prudent, commit no excesses, and when you are quite recovered, I beg you to make me a Madonna with your own hand, and I will always pay my devotions to it for your sake." This I promised to do, and then asked him whether it would be safe for me to travel so far as to Florence. He advised me to wait till I was stronger, and till we could observe how nature worked in me.
It so happened on one of those mornings, while I was still getting some little chisels into trim to work on the narcissus, that a very fine splinter of steel flew into my right eye, and embedded itself so deeply in the pupil that it could not be extracted. I thought for certain I must lose the sight of that eye. After some days, I sent for Maestro Raffaello de Pili, the surgeon, who obtained a couple of live pigeons, and, placing me upon my back across a table, took the birds and opened a large vein they have beneath the wing, so that the blood gushed out into my eye. I felt immediately relieved, and in the space of 2 days the splinter came away, and I remained with my eyesight greatly improved. Against the feast of Santa Lucia, which came around in 3 days, I made a golden eye out of a French crown, and had it presented at her shrine by one of my 6 nieces, daughters of my sister Liperata. The girl was 10 years of age, and in her company I returned thanks to God and Santa Lucia. For some while afterwards I did not work at the Narcissus, but pushed my Perseus forward under all the difficulties I have described. It was my purpose to finish it, and then to bid farewell to Florence. End of section 14.
Quick note: St. Lucia or Santa Lucia is the patron saint of eyesight, which is why Benvenuto Cellini creates a votive for her in this case. She's the saint who is often shown carrying her own eyeballs around on a plate. But back to Cellini.
Chapters 104 through 110. Chapter 104. During my promenade through the market, I met Giovan Battista Santini, and he and I were taken back to supper by the priest. As I have related above, we supped at the early hour of 20, because I made it known that I meant to return to Trespiano. Accordingly they made all ready. The wife of Sabietta went bustling about in the company of one Cecchino Buti, their knave of all work. After the salads had been mixed and we were preparing to sit down to table, that evil priest, with a certain nasty sort of grin, exclaimed: "I must beg you to excuse me, for I cannot sup with you. The reason is that some business of importance has occurred, which I must transact for my brother Sibietta. In his absence I am obliged to act for him." We all begged him to stay, but could not alter his determination, so he departed and we began our supper. After we had eaten the salads on some common platters, and they were preparing to serve the boiled meat, each guest received a porringer for himself. Santini, who was seated opposite me at table, exclaimed: "Do you notice that the crockery they give you is different from the rest? Did you ever see anything handsomer?" I answered that I had not noticed it. He also prayed me to invite Sibietta's wife to sit down with us, for she and that Cecchino Buti kept running hither and thither in the most extraordinary fuss and hurry. At last I induced the woman to join us. When she began to remonstrate: "You do not like my victuals, since you eat so little," I answered by praising the supper over and over again, and saying that I had never eaten better or with heartier appetite. Finally I told her that I had eaten quite enough. I could not imagine why she urged me so persistently to eat. After supper was over and it was past the hour of 21, I became anxious to return to Trespiano, in order that I might recommence my work next morning in the loggia. Accordingly I bade farewell to the company, and having thanked our hostess, took my leave. I had not gone 3 miles before I felt as though my stomach was on fire, and suffered such pain that it seemed 1,000 years till I arrived at Trespiano. However, it pleased God that I reached it after nightfall with great toil, and immediately proceeded to my farm, where I went to bed. During the night I got no sleep, and was constantly disturbed by motions of my bowels. When day broke, feeling an intense heat in the rectum, I looked eagerly to see what this might mean, and found the cloth covered with blood. Then in a moment I conceived that I had eaten something poisonous, and racked my brains to think what it could have possibly been. It came back to my memory how Sbietta's wife had set before me plates and porringers and saucers different from the others, and how that evil priest, Sbietta's brother, after giving himself such pains to do me honour, had yet refused to sup with us. Furthermore, I remembered what the priest had said about Sbietta's doing such a fine stroke of business by the sale of his farm to an old man for life, who could not be expected to survive a year. Giovanni Sardella had reported these words to me. All things considered, I made my mind up that they must have administered a dose of sublimate in the sauce, which was very well made and pleasant to the taste, inasmuch as sublimate produces all the symptoms I was suffering from. Now it is my custom to take but little sauce or seasoning with my meat, excepting salt, and yet I had eaten 2 moderate mouthfuls of that sauce because it was so tasteful. On further thinking, I recollected how often that wife of Sbietta had teased me in 100 ways to partake more freely of the sauce. On these accounts I felt absolutely certain that they had given me sublimate in that very dish. Chapter 105. Albeit I was suffering so severely, I forced myself to work upon my colossus in the loggia. But after a few days I succumbed to the malady and took to my bed. No sooner did the Duchess hear that I was ill than she caused the execution of that unlucky marble to be assigned to Bartolommeo Ammannato. He sent word to me through Messer living Street that I might now do what I liked with my model since he had won the marble. This Messer was one of the lovers of Bartolommeo Ammannato's wife, and being the most favoured on account of his gentle manners and discretion, Ammannato made things easy for him. There would be much to say upon this topic, however. I do not care to imitate his master Bandinello, who always wandered from the subject in his talk. Suffice it to say that I told Ammannato's messenger I had always imagined it would turn out thus: let the man strain himself to the utmost, in proof of gratitude to fortune, for so great a favour so undeservedly conferred on him by her. All this while I stayed with sorry cheer in bed, and was attended by that most excellent man and physician, Maestro Francesco do Montevacchi. Together with him Maestro Raffaello de Pili undertook the surgical part of my case. Forasmuch as the sublimate had so corroded the intestines that I was unable to retain my motions. When Maestro Francesco saw that the poison had exerted all its strength, being indeed insufficient in quantity to overcome my vigorous constitutions, he said one day: "Benvenuto, return thanks to God, for you have won the battle. Have no anxiety, since I mean to cure you, in spite of the rogues who sought to work your ruin." Maestro Raffaello then put in: "This will be one of the finest and most difficult cures which was ever heard of; for I can tell you, Benvenuto, that you swallowed a good mouthful of sublimate." Thereupon Maestro Francesco took him up and said: "It may possibly have been some venomous caterpillar." I replied: "I know for certain what sort of poison it was, and who gave it to me." Upon which we all were silent. They attended me more than 6 full months, and I remained more than a whole year before I could enjoy my life and vigour. Chapter 108. The Duke was staying at Livorno, where I went to visit him in order merely to obtain release from his service. Now that I felt my vigour returning, and saw that I was used for nothing, it pained me to lose time which ought to have been spent upon my art. I made my mind up, therefore, went to Livorno, and found my prince, who received me with exceeding graciousness. Now I stayed there several days, and went out riding daily with his Excellency. Consequently, I had excellent opportunities for saying all I wanted, since it was the Duke's custom to ride 4 miles out of Livorno along the sea coast to the point where he was erecting a little fort. Not caring to be troubled with a crowd of people, he liked me to converse with him. So then, on one of these occasions, having observed him pay me some remarkable attentions, I entered into the affair of Sbietta and spoke as follows: My lord, I should like to narrate to your most illustrious Excellency a very singular incident, which will explain why I was prevented from finishing that clay model of Neptune on which I was working in the Loggia. Your Excellency must know that I bought a farm for my life from Sbietta. To cut the matter short, I related the whole story in detail, without contaminating truth with falsehood. Now, when I came to the poison, I remarked that if I had ever proved an acceptable servant in the sight of his most illustrious Excellency, he ought not to punish Sbietta or those who administered the poison, but rather to confer upon them some great benefit, inasmuch as the poison was not enough to kill me, but had exactly sufficed to cleanse me of a mortal viscosity from which I suffered in my stomach and intestines. The poison, quoth I, worked so well, that whereas before I took it I had perhaps but 3 or 4 years to live, I verily believe now that it has helped me to more than 20 years by bettering my constitution. For this mercy I return thanks to God with greater heartiness than ever, and this proves that a proverb I have sometimes heard spoken is true, which runs as follows: God send us evil that may work us good. The Duke listened to my story through more than 2 miles of travel, keeping his attention fixed, and only uttering, "Oh, the villains!" I said in conclusion that I felt obliged to them, and opened other and more cheerful subjects of conversation.
Your saga may vary.